extra tension in the Middle East have reached a dangerous new height as the Iran-Israeli conflict escalates, drawing global concerns and sparking fears of a wider regional war. Now, but while missiles are flying thousands of miles away, the tremors are already being felt here in Africa's largest economy. Rising oil prices, security shifts, geopolitical alliances. What exactly does this conflict mean for Nigeria? Could our fuel import costs spiral further? What's the risk to diaspora Nigerians in conflict-prone zones? And is this yet another blow to an already fragile global economic outlook?
So could our fuel imports costs spiral further? And what's the risk of diaspora Nigerians in conflict-prone zones, as well as is this yet another blow to an already fragile global economic outlook, like Mazina's rightly pointed out? Yeah, so to help us connect the dots, we are joined now by Ikemesit Effiong. He is a partner and head of research at SBM Intelligence, one of Nigeria's foremost geopolitical and economic analysis firms. As always, Ikemesit, it's wonderful to have you join us. Let's just get started with the basics here. And let's give a, just, with a broad view, how serious is this current escalation between Iran and Israel? And how different is it from past floods that we've seen? I mean, we saw the rains of fire and brimstone in the sky, but
it's first. Good morning, Mazino and Judy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
It's difficult to say. Usually with conflicts in the Middle East, right? You run the risk of a wider regional contagion if expectations are not managed, and if either party, right, decides to stray out of sort of directly engaging with each other militarily towards, and you have a situation where the conflict escalates towards them targeting critical economic infrastructure, which is shared across a number of countries, right, within the region, many of whom are either allies of the United States or have reached some kind of accommodation with either Israel or Iran. So that's probably where the needle would move significantly, as we've seen with exchanges between both sides in the past, when the fears of them dramatically escalating was quite significant. They were able to pull back with some intervention from other international actors, right? This current engagement is the longest direct engagement that both sides have had historically to date. But what we're seeing in the Israeli-Iranian relationship, if you can call it a relationship, right, in that sense, is that with each subsequent engagement, the needle appears to be moving further and further down the path of escalation. And that's where the worry and that's where the concern is. Prior to 2023, 2024, right, both parties had only ever engaged with each other through proxies. Iran, perhaps most significantly through Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but also through Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a range of other groups that were operating in Syria, right, in the conflict situation that exists down there. And Israel had obviously carried out targeted assassination of key Iranian proxies, or the leaders of key Iranian proxy groups right across the region historically, right? So, but prior to last year, engagement, right, wasn't direct until Iran decided to respond to a series of Israeli assassinations of Iranian military and political officials itself by directly sending rockets and drones on Israeli targets within Israeli territory. And that was seen as one of the uncrossable red lines in international geopolitics. Obviously, that changed. Both parties were able to dial back, right, that very significant escalation of activities. But now that we've crossed that threshold and we're dealing with a second round of Israeli-Iranian engagement on a more direct plane, and it's very hard to say where this sort of goes. Iran has said that it will not attack Israel if Israel stops attacking it. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that this particular phase of the operation could continue for days, and it will continue until it is satisfied that it has been able to effectively degrade Iran's capacity to, as it sees it, develop a nuclear weapon. And you have a host of observers and watchers who are saying that Israel is essentially doing this in order to derail those negotiations between Iran and the United States towards preventing the development of said, nuclear weapons. Right. Israel thinks an agreement between Iran and the US is anathema to its interest for, some would say for good reason. So the current conflict is set within, somewhat deep history and a deep animosity between, both of these sides, which stretches back decades. So it's really unclear, right, where this particular phase of the conflict heads. It probably will continue for the next couple of days. At the very least, it will continue for well into this week. But apart from that, the possibility of attacking shipping within the region, which the Iranian foreign minister suggested a couple of hours ago, may be on the cards, and the fact that Israel has not said that its attacks will be confined to targets within Iranian territory.
Now, Ikemesit, just a second there. Let's touch where it hurts Nigeria. Let's talk about global oil routes. Let's talk about how it affects the world, first of all, and the implications that it has for a country like Nigeria that's totally dependent on exporting oil. What are we looking at here? Is this going to affect our price in any way? And how are we going to fare if it does?
Well, it's a bit contextual, right? But the potential for the potential, I mean, obviously the conflict has moved oil prices first and foremost, right? So oil prices are probably at their highest levels, at the very least, that we've seen this year. For a country like Nigeria, where first the cost of producing a barrel of crude here in Nigeria is relatively high compared to other crude exporters globally, that's generally seen as a good sign. Secondly, our national budget benchmark, the benchmark price for a barrel of crude, which we've used as the basis for setting the national budget for this year, was also much higher than where crude prices has been throughout the year. So obviously, international Brent going up and our reference crude benchmark Bonny Light being priced as a premium to Brent, that obviously helps. The extra layer, right, to that is that Nigerian oil production has been relatively soft historically. It's come up now, right, to about 1.5-ish million barrels of crude produced per day if you add condensate, right? But while that is good compared to where we've been over the last 3 to 5 years, right, where we've essentially been producing between 1.1 to 1.2 million barrels, that's a good thing. But Nigeria's production capacity is at almost 2 million barrels of crude. So there's a question around whether our current production levels will enable us take advantage of higher crude prices. The third thing to mention is that a lot of our crude production is already provisioned for, and mostly through direct contracts with international oil trading firms. Those prices have already been locked in and been set. Those contracts have been signed for months and often stretch for at the very minimum a year and a half, and they will not be at these higher crude prices. So a lot of our crude production will actually happen. A lot of our crude production will actually be sold at much lower prices than we see right now. The the only advantage is, heading forward, right? In terms of some of the crude contracts that we may be able to lock in from here over the next probably 3 to 6 months. We could lock those in at some of these higher prices. But again, if we had a lot more crude production, then Nigeria would probably, or Nigerian policymakers would probably be feeling much better than they are right now.
Right. I mean, beyond economics, we have to also talk about, the security dimension of this, right? And given Nigeria's position, not just religious, but also our Muslim ties with, both Western and Muslim majority countries, we have to put this to the fore. Do you think with this fallout, it would affect Nigeria? Would there be a risk of proxy ripple, whether with ideology or otherwise, in terms of, ripple effects?
Well, you have to break down that indicator, along two lines. First is the sovereign line in terms of how the Nigerian government approaches this. Yeah, successive Nigerian administrations, this one included, have done a pretty interesting job of towing the middle line internationally in terms of how it manages the Israeli sort of Palestinian relationship, which is sort of the critical lynch point of any sort of engagement with any number of countries in the Middle East. We've generally taken the middle road, which is to essentially say, okay, we recognize the right of Palestinians to self-determination, while at the same time not being overtly dramatic enough in our official statements or in aspects of our diplomatic relationship in order to in effect give the Israeli side any sort of discomfort. So we've maintained diplomatic relations with Israel while still theoretically supporting Palestinian sovereignty. The second is a bit more cultural, right, and social, as you've said, and that's where religion comes into play. Nigeria is vastly predominantly Sunni Muslim. There are two main strands, right, of Islam: Sunni and Shia Islam, and Iran is predominantly Shia Islam, right? And so in the past, we've actually had some issues with Iranian, sort of geopolitical engagement in this part of the world, or just West and Central Africa in general, but Nigeria in particular, because there is a very small but very vocal Shia minority, right, in Nigeria, exemplified by an organization called the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, led for decades by Ibrahim El-Zakzaki. We've arrested him a number of times. He's been incarcerated in various Nigerian prisons, right, for years. But he has received training, he has received support, he has received financial and moral support from Iran. He's even been to Iran several times and schooled in Iran, and that has been a problem, right, for Nigeria for a while. And even though we have diplomatic ties with Iran, it's a point that successive Nigerian administrations have made clear that level of engagement with the IMN is one that Abuja finds very uncomfortable. And so in that sense, right, Nigeria has not been motivated to come out strongly, either diplomatically by making statements or doing anything significant or overt, like dialing down its diplomatic engagement with Israel in favor of Iran, just because of, first, that cultural divide between the type of Islam which is practiced in Iran and the one that many Nigerian Muslims pay fidelity to, but also because of Iran's own geopolitical moves within Nigeria and within Nigeria's near abroad. So in that sense, I would say this current conflict is one that, from a geopolitical standpoint, Nigeria probably is able to sit out. It's interesting to note that the body language of many of the other actors in the Middle East, all of whom are Sunni Islam, or at least are run by Sunni Muslim administrations, but they may have significant Shia Islam minorities, is to essentially call for caution, right?
Okay.
Many of them
Ikemesit
are not friends of Iran. Many of them don't have diplomatic relations with Islam. So
Ikemesit,
it's not our fight, and we've largely just...
Let's take a shift from diplomatic relationships now. Let's talk about what Nigeria would owe its people who are in conflict conflict-prone areas. Only just yesterday, or was it 2 days ago, Israel issued a communication to people who might be in these areas, these conflict-prone areas, or even all countries, asking them very specifically to be cautious. One of these communications said that they should not display flags openly, amongst other things that were quite, it seemed like they were gearing up for something. Nigeria, on the other hand, I'm wondering, what does Nigeria owe its, well, citizens who are in these areas, especially maybe even in places like Israel? Are we taking these cautions ourselves? Are we putting it out? Are we making arrangements for people who are outside the country? What suggestions do you have for the authorities there?
Well, in terms of what Nigeria is doing, that's not very clear, and I think that's been one of the consistent failings is the word that is in my head, but I don't necessarily know that. Well, shortcomings is probably a better way to describe it, right? Of Nigerian diplomatic statecraft, which is offering the right kind of consular support to Nigerians abroad. This is something that we have personally seen at SBM Intelligence with one of our colleagues. The first exchange during the first round of exchanges between Israel and Iran, we actually had a colleague who was in Israel, right, on handling a research project, and it was actually quite difficult to get her out of the country, and we had no form of consular support whatsoever in order to facilitate that. So the Nigerian Foreign Service, the Foreign Ministry, could do a lot better in terms of one, offering rules of engagement for Nigerians, both in Israel and in Iran. There are Nigerians who are in Iran, by the way, in terms of how they manage and coordinate their activities and what they should do in the event of any sort of conflict escalation, what sort of hotline to reach, what kind of services they should expect, and all of that. It's not clear that exists right now, and that is something that needs to change going forward for Nigerians themselves, in terms of what they need to do, sort of on a more personal level. It always helps when you're abroad, just generally, to keep a low profile, right? You are there at the discretionary pleasure of the regulatory and the government authorities there anyway, to begin with. That's really what your visa gives you a right to. It's not an absolute right, it is a conditional right, and you should live and carry out your activities with that sort of mindset, right, in place. It always helps in conflict-prone territories to have something close to an exit strategy. Maybe good to have an open ticket just in case things come up and you need to leave the country. But it may also be good to have a plan B that involves some kind of overland travel. If you are in Israel, for example, right now, the main international airport has been closed for the third day running, and so you can't actually even fly or leave the country, right, in any sense. And there have been flight restrictions, right, over Iranian territory. Many airlines are electing not to overfly both Israeli and Iranian territory out of an abundance of caution. And so probably in the early phase of a conflict, it would help to just double down, wait, watch the situation, but probably plan, right, a potential exit strategy if you feel you have to leave the country, right, in mind. And with these things and with all conflicts, right, the situation is always dynamic. It is always subject to change. And so, make sure your plans aren't set in stone, just generally, and be flexible and be open to adjusting, as the situation on the ground changes.
Ikemesit, you study patterns and public sentiments, giving your job. And I have to ask you, just very quickly, in 30 seconds, do you think that Nigeria understands what's at stake and is ready for what's to come, or are they just, skimping at it and letting it fly under the radar? Very quickly.
Our strategy has always been wait and see, and I think this particular conflict will not necessarily change that. Is that wise? Not necessarily, considering the geopolitical and economic implications, but the capacity of the Nigerian state to effectively execute on a more proactive strategy is a bit challenged. We've got many problems at home. We've got many problems in and near abroad. This is just, entering the queue or adding to the pile, as it were. And unfortunately, we are likely to be a bit more reactionary if this conflict significantly escalates to a point where it begins to directly harm a lot of Nigeria's direct and indirect interests.
Right. Ikemesit, we want to say thank you for taking that time to join us. Ikemesit Effiong, he is a partner and head research at SBM Intelligence, giving us a bit of insight and the implications of the Iran-Israel conflict and what it would mean for Nigeria. Once again, many thanks. We appreciate you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure having me.